What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Mike, and today you join me here to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the iPhone 5, which went on sale exactly a decade ago today on September 21st, 2012. This is the second video in my series where I provide an objective retrospective on the state of tech and gaming as it was a decade ago, so I won't be looking at anything through rose-tinted glasses. So without further ado, let's talk iPhone 5. As you can see here, both of these iPhone 5s I have in front of me are running iOS 6, but I won't be going over software in any real detail here. Just to sum things up, the iPhone 5 supported iOS versions 6 through 10 and never had any unique software features over the course of its support lifecycle, even missing out on some new general features brought along by newer iOS versions as its hardware aged and couldn't keep up. This is obviously a far cry from recent iPhones, which not only come with unique software features depending on the model, but also don't miss out on as many general features with every new version of iOS. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the hardware of the iPhone 5 and what it meant in the world of Apple. iPhone 5 was and still is notable for being the first model to feature a significant change in its form factor since the first generation was released in 2007. While the first 5 iPhones all sported a compact design that got ever so slightly smaller with each major redesign, and a 3.5-inch LCD with a 3:2 aspect ratio, the iPhone 5 put an end to that trend and got bigger instead. Looking at what the iPhone 5 competed against, it's not surprising that Apple would kick what Steve Jobs once called the ideal size to the curb and keep up with the times by enlarging the iPhone. The competition was hard at work, cranking out phones with bigger bodies and 4.5, 5, and 5.5 inch and even bigger displays, the larger of which were often a bit unwieldy as they didn't quite have the technology yet to cram large displays into small bodies. The iPhone 5, on the other hand, just grew a bit taller, its screen size increased by a whopping half an inch. So yes, the iPhone did get bigger, but it was still a tiny little thing when compared to what everyone else was making. The screen, still an IPS LCD, now sported a 16:9 aspect ratio, but remained a 640p not even HD resolution, having been used since the iPhone 4 2 years earlier and likely because its pixel density was high enough for such a small device to allow for crisp images and text. Apple tried to justify this in early advertising for the iPhone 5 by claiming it was for the sake of easy one-handed operation, but that seemed to have worked as it sold well and Apple was able to keep this display size around for smaller devices well into the future, like the original iPhone SE and the final 3 generations of the iPod Touch. In fact, the overall form factor of the iPhone 5 seemed to have defined how big a small phone should be to Apple, since the recent iPhone 12 and 13 minis were only ever so slightly bigger than the 5's form factor. The rest of the iPhone 5, however, actually got smaller, or at least it did on the outside. Compared to the predecessor 4S, its bezels were smaller, it was thinner, and likely due to its changes in construction and materials, it was also lighter. Now, another likely reason why competing devices were getting bigger was because their batteries were also getting bigger, but that wasn't necessary for the iPhone 5 as the efficiency of Apple's silicon enabled it to make do with a relatively small 1440 mAh battery. As for the construction and materials of the iPhone 5, the preceding glass sandwich design with a steel frame was eliminated in favor of an aluminum unibody with small but elegantly inlaid pieces of glass so various signals can continue to pass through in and out of the phone. iPhones will continue to employ unibody construction to this very day, even as they've gone back to the glass sandwich design. It continued to feature flat sides with chamfered edges, though Apple claimed they were diamond cut this time around, round volume buttons with plus and minus markings, and a top-mounted power button. Once again, it was available in black and white, with the white model sporting raw aluminum, and the black model featured an anodized finish Apple called Slate, which was a dark bluish color not unlike the midnight finish available on today's Apple devices. However, Slate wasn't the most durable finish and was easy to damage, revealing the raw color of the metal underneath, so it was quickly dropped by the release of the iPhone 5S the following year. The iPhone 5 was also the first iPhone to support 4G connectivity, although it continued to feature Bluetooth 4.0 and Wi-Fi N. Some more minor but welcome hardware changes made with the iPhone 5 were the relocation of the headphone jack from the top of the phone to the bottom, and additional microphones at the back of the phone and inside the earpiece for in-call noise cancellation. However, aside from changes in construction and form factor and the addition of 4G support, the biggest change brought along by the iPhone 5, not only to the iPhone but to much of Apple's hardware for years to come, was the elimination of the 30-pin dock connector, which debuted in 2003, in favor of the smaller, reversible 8-pin Lightning connector. This change was controversial at the time as it rendered the iPhone 5 incompatible with many 30-pin cables and accessories that are still being produced and sold to that very day. However, Apple being Apple had a solution for that and was more than happy to sell users a dongle to make them work together. From that day forward, the Lightning connector became Apple's new 30-pin and how it became as much of a cash cow from the licensing revenue it generated. Of course, as we all know, the Lightning connector is still going strong today in Apple's peripherals, the entry-level iPad, and the entirety of the current iPhone lineup, including the latest and greatest 14 Pro Max. Moving on to the rest of the hardware, let's talk cameras. The iPhone 5 featured a 1.2 megapixel front-facing camera, which was capable of recording video at 720p, and an 8 megapixel rear-facing camera capable of recording video at 1080p. Both cameras captured video at 30 frames per second, and it was pretty much par for the course when it came to camera hardware and flagship smartphones back then, considering how mobile photography was only beginning to take off at that time. The front camera was serviceable enough for video calls and low-res selfies, which, frankly enough, would have been destroyed by compression in social media anyway had they been captured at higher resolutions, and the rear camera was excellent in ideal conditions. The rear camera hardware was very similar to what the predecessor 4S had, but did have a longer focal length and new image processor. That being said, it left a lot to be desired in low light, although that wasn't uncommon among the competition either, and this was in spite of its low light capabilities having been improved over those of the 4S thanks to its upgraded image processor. The flash was really a necessity for low light photography with the iPhone 5. The rear camera's relatively low 8 megapixel resolution even back then, with some competitors packing higher res sensors, combined with a lack of optical zoom meant images would come out worse the more they were zoomed in. It also lacked optical image stabilization, so videos would exhibit a bit of jitter that the electronic stabilization was unable to compensate for. Now this video isn't really meant to be a full in-depth review of the iPhone 5 or its cameras, so I'll just quickly throw some photos that I took with the iPhone 5 on screen to show you what it was capable of in the right conditions. If you want to see a comprehensive test and review of the iPhone 5's cameras, Detroit Borg made a pretty good one back in the day, and I have it linked in the description if you want to see it. Anyway, let's move on to audio. The iPhone 5 featured a 3.5mm headphone jack through which audio was channeled from a Cirrus Logic DAC, an earpiece that was only suitable for calls, and a single mono loudspeaker at the bottom. Now, this being an objective look back at the iPhone 5, I can't really speak for how good it sounded through its various outputs, how effective its in-call noise cancelling was, or how good it was at recording sound because everyone will perceive the results differently. If anything, the audio situation with the iPhone 5 was also what one would expect from a decade-old flagship. Of course, I can't continue from here without mentioning that the iPhone 5 also came with a heavily redesigned version of Apple's classic wired earbuds called EarPods. They were really intended to fix the biggest issues with the original Apple earbuds more than anything, namely fit and fidelity. And it seems like they succeeded in doing so because not only are they still being produced and sold new today, but their basic design is still being used in the latest generation of wireless AirPods. Before I end this video off, let's talk internals and what they translated to in the iPhone 5's performance. It featured the A6 SoC, which packed a full gigabyte of system memory, up from half a gig in the previous model, a dual-core CPU clocked at 1.3 GHz, and a 3-core GPU. While these specs don't seem like much on paper and didn't either back in the day, this is an iPhone we're talking about, so it was able to easily keep up with the competition at the time. It was an absolute joy to use an iOS 6, although later iOS versions and their added heft compared to iOS 6's lightweight and relatively bare-bones nature would lead to it having trouble holding up with updates, something recent iPhones are much better at doing. And there we have the iPhone 5. Looking back at it 10 years later, it's easy to tell we've come a long way since then, with newer models having grown up in more than just their size. Please feel free to leave a like if you enjoyed this video or dislike it if you didn't, I don't really care. Discuss down in the comments, and subscribe if you don't want to miss the whole slew of videos I'll be releasing next month in continuation of this series. Until then, go out there, enjoy your lives, and we'll see each other again in October.